Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Dean Meadows for another episode of Dean's Dialogue in association with The Daily Apologist. I hope you're having an amazing Thursday. I am super excited about this episode, but before we get to our guest, just a couple of shameless plugs. Make sure that if you haven't done so already, follow us on Facebook, on Instagram. Our handle is The Daily Apologist. On Twitter, it's daily_apologist. And obviously here on our YouTube channel, it is The Daily Apologist. So enough of the shameless plugs. Let's go ahead and get right in. I am super excited to have on the show today Krotz, who is a graduate of the Bear Valley Bible Institute. That's the only thing that I'm going to say about him. I'll let Chris speak for himself. Chris, just go ahead, briefly tell us who you are, tell us the name of your organization, and kind of tell us how all that got started.
Oh, boy. So my name's Krotz, like you said, and I'm the pulpit preacher at the Carlisle Church of Christ in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And my organization is Overcome. And our website is wheniamweak.org. So everything that you hear today can also be found over there, along with a bunch of other helps and articles. And we have our own podcast as well. And I guess the reason why this got started was kind of more of a personal thing, because as you've mentioned, we're going to be talking about pornography today, and I struggled with it for a long time, and I was finally sick and fed up of it that I wanted to do something about it. So I started doing more research and figuring out what's the best way to overcome this. You see what I did there?
I see what you did there.
And so I started this with a couple of my friends who were also preachers at Bear Valley, or preaching students at Bear Valley. And we've been doing this. Overcome has been alive for about 5 years now. I have multiple groups that I meet with, men from all over the country and world, that we are all together trying to help each other overcome internet pornography addiction.
Awesome. I mean, that is definitely needed. Grateful that you and the team over there at Overcome are standing in the gap with this important issue, but maybe from a secular standpoint and not a Christian worldview, or maybe it might even be a mindset that's in the church. I guess my first question for you is, who really cares about pornography? It seems so normative now. It seems like everybody is doing it. Why bother addressing the issue?
Yeah, good question. I think, you say that it's the norm today. And, going back to high school, 15 years ago, when I was in high school, it was the norm then. So like, this is not a new thing. If anything, it's become even more acceptable and more of a norm today. You hear, at least I hear, I don't know why these ads pop up on Pandora for me, because I don't have the premium subscription, so I still have to hear the commercials. But they talk about these websites you can go to, and you can share with your partner pornographic videos, and that'll spice up your sex life and stuff like that. So I think it's become more of the norm, especially not just for men to watch pornography, but for women. And then also as it's like a couples thing now. Like, you can watch porn with your significant other. That seems a little weird to me. But yeah. That's where our culture is right now. It is very much the norm. In fact, some of the guys that I've helped out, they're seeking counseling elsewhere, and their counselors actually prescribed them. You should just, watch pornography and give yourself a little self-love. And I think, like, that is that professional that who knows the dangers of pornography and that it can be addictive would prescribe something like that.
Chris, let me stop you right there. So you're saying that people are going in for couples therapy, and the professional who knows the dangers of pornography, which we'll get into in a little bit, is prescribing them to watch pornography?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Kind of crazy to me. Maybe not to other people. Maybe that's just like a normal thing. Maybe I'm, just completely disconnected with the culture and society. But that seems weird. Seems
Wow,
weird.
that is interesting, but maybe the counter to what you're saying about it being damaging, and this is my second question: how does pornography really hurt anybody? I mean, I've talked to people before about this very subject, and they say, hey, I mean, I'm watching it, by myself, or I'm watching it with somebody who I deeply care about, my significant other, and we're watching it. How is that damaging me? How is that damaging my significant other, and how is that damaging that relationship if we're free, moral, consenting adults?
Absolutely. And that really is the question. And my answer to that really it's gonna kind of set up for everything that we're going to talk about today. And so I'm going to say these briefly, but we're going to definitely get into more of this as we go on today. But the three areas that it really damages or has the potential to damage is yourself, your brain, your mind, and how you view people. Another way that it can be damaging is to our culture and how, just in general, how we treat each other. But then also, from my particular worldview, I'm a Christian, and it can also be damaging and sever that relationship with our God. So it is sinful. It is sin, and even if your wife doesn't care, it's still that has no bearing on what you are doing and how you are viewing or using other people.
Hmm. So, kind of walk me through some of these things that you've described as being damaging. Now I don't know the specifics, and I'm glad that you're here because you're kind of like the subject matter expert on this. For me. So walk me through this. I've heard it said that pornography is like a drug or adversely impacts the brain. Number one, is it really like a drug? And two, how does it adversely impact the brain? And maybe go into some detail about, short term, long term effects on the brain.
Well, there's a lot there's a lot here.
I know.
That is one loaded
That
question.
is.
But before I get into like the chemicals and the chemical effects on our brain and stuff like that, I'll illustrate it this way. There was a study done, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, that they wired up a bunch of guys, their brains, and we're able to do brain mapping now, which is really cool because we're able to see what areas of the brain lights up to different stimuli that we have in front of us, and it is really interesting. These men were shown a variety of images, and two types of images were very closely linked, and that is when guys were looking at power tools, certain areas of the brain lit up, and then when they were looking at nude or semi-nude pictures of women, the same areas of the brain lit up that when they were looking at power tools. Basically, the ways that our brains are wired, that when we see a woman like that we want, we then treat her, or our brains see her as something to be used, like a tool,
Mm.
like we would use a tool.
So that's the connection then. It's not, because we as men have the same physical stimuli to a woman as a tool, but we have a tendency to, not a tendency, it's clear from what you've said in the brain mapping, we see the woman as an object.
Yeah, I mean, and then with the whole cultural thing, right? Like freedom of expression, I find this really, we're in this really weird spot as a culture here in America. where freedom of expression is very big, right? If you want to wear that, then you should be allowed to wear that. If you want to go nude in public, then you should be allowed to do that. But at the same time, that's actively working against their same cause, because these women don't want to be treated like objects. But then, at some point, we can't. It's hard for us men to not view that as objectivity, when that's the only thing that's being shown to us, or our only option. So this puts us in a really weird spot in history, as our culture is evolving and developing. Some might say degrading, mm-hmm. right? We're just in this really weird spot right now. And so we're talking about damages, and hopefully that's clear why that could be damaging to someone's brain, right? Like, viewing people as an object, as something to be used, should never be a thing, right? That's not what we should be looking at each other as, or treating each other as.
No, I agree, and I think the Christian worldview lays that out in how we should treat both Christians, but also people in general, that they're not just objects to satisfy a specific need, want, or desire that we have. So now that we've kind of moved first to the area of, all right, this is kind of how the brain lights up when it, at least from the male perspective, when it sees a nude or semi-nude woman, it registers the same as, an object to be used like a power tool. Go into some of the chemical things that happen in the brain, and answer the question, would you consider that or would you consider pornography a drug based upon that?
Well, is pornography like a drug? Yes and no. It itself is not really the thing that someone gets addicted to, because there are millions of people out there who can view pornographic material once in their lives, or like a very, very small amount of times in their life, and never really get hooked on it. It's just like, okay, that's there, sure, that was attractive, but I don't feel this pull towards that. An addict is more about chemicals that our brain produces, and those are really the chemicals that our brains produce. That's what can be the addictive side of it. And then there's 5 drugs. You can cut me off whenever you want me to. Okay.
No, keep going. I'm interested. I'm interested. Keep going.
Okay. Well, the first and foremost drug that we need to talk about is dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good drug that our brains naturally produce. When I eat pizza, my brain releases dopamine saying, that was good.
That tastes good.
You should eat that again, right? That's what our brains produce to give us that. You should do that again. That was great. But the problem is that sexual encounters also produce dopamine, because, newsflash, sex feels good. Right? And I know the church doesn't want to talk about that, but it's true. When we have sex, our brain produces dopamine, and it's our brain telling us that felt good, do that again. The problem is that with pornography, when you have access to it anytime you want, then that's basically the equivalent of a cocaine addict living in his own cocaine factory, right? Where do you go to escape your own brain? If you tell yourself, oh, I can feel this good, and studies have shown that watching pornography and acting out to it can make you feel, or it's a 10 to 11 times the amount of dopamine that's normally in our brains that gets released. So if you tell someone you can feel 10 to 11 times better anytime you want, that's a lot of temptation to turn down.
Wow, I never knew that. That's
a lot of people don't.
Yeah, that's why we got you on the show.
Talk about it.
But no, that is okay. Like, even if I want you to go into the other chemicals. But even if we didn't, I just want our listeners to hone in on what Chris just said, that as you access pornography, I like Chris's illustration. It's like a cocaine addict going into his or her own factory. And he makes another good point. How can I escape my own brain with regards to this issue? So I'm already floored about the analysis and the science behind the release of dopamine in the brain, both as the happy, drug, and also, the negative side of this is what takes place with regards to dopamine in the brain upon accessing pornography. All right, so what's another chemical?
All right, before we go there, there's a catch.
Okay.
There's a catch to dopamine, okay? Because dopamine loves novelty. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a reason why I don't eat pizza for every meal every single day, right? Even the people, that love a certain type of food, they don't eat it every meal for every single day because it will get old, right?
Okay.
The dopamine levels will start to decrease if the same stimulus is used over and over and over again. And so what do you need? You need a greater stimulus.
Are you going to tell me what different. I think you're going to tell me?
I can't read minds, but in regards to pornography and the release of dopamine, is that it's never satisfied. Okay. So it's not just, you can feel good. It's okay, I'm done watching this scene or this actor or actress. I need something better. I need something more taboo. I need something more dangerous. And before long, they call it chasing the dopamine in addiction circles, chasing the dopamine, because if you start chasing the dopamine, it can lead you to all sorts of weird and areas in your life where you thought you would say to yourself, how did I end up here? Right? How did I end up here? Something in the news right now, Netflix just released a documentary series on the Ted Bundy tapes, right? Mm-hmm. And in those tapes, he's on death row and he's kind of, talking about his life and, how did he end up here? Ted Bundy started off with softcore pornography tapes. That's where it started for him. And then he chased the dopamine to the point of, okay, just sleeping with these women wasn't good enough. Just physically assaulting them wasn't enough. The next high for him was killing them. And then, why wouldn't it just stop at one? Because if you chase the dopamine long enough, that's where it leads. Now, I'm not saying that every porn addict will turn into a serial killer. I'm not saying that. But that should be the end game scenario, right? Like if you don't get it in check, you might not become a serial killer, but you're going to get yourself in situations where you're going to look at your life and, turn around and say, how did I end up here? Mm. And that's what chasing the dopamine can look like. But another drug that our brains naturally produce, especially for us men, is testosterone. That's our hormone drug that our brains produce that makes us, act manly and, have deep voice and grow hair on our chests and stuff like that. But the problem with testosterone is that testosterone is also linked with sexual desire. There's a reason why men want sex more than women, and that's because we have more testosterone. In fact, I heard one case where a woman was prescribed testosterone I think it was to help her get through menopause, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but she was prescribed testosterone, and her willingness or want to have sex went through the roof to the point where her husband went back to the doctor and said, "Doc, we're too old for this. Okay, we can't be doing this all the time." And that's a good thing, right? Testosterone's good, sexual desire is good, but testosterone is also released when you watch pornography. And more gets released the more that you watch it. And so testosterone is linked to our sexual desire. When you watch pornography, more testosterone is released. And so it's not just that you want it more. And the more you watch it, the more you want it. You can see a problem there, right?
Yeah, I can definitely see a massive issue with just those first two chemicals, and I literally am. I'm speechless. I'm floored because I never. Once again, that's why I'm glad had to have you on the show. Is I've never heard about this before, and we'll get more into that maybe as to why people in the church don't. But let's just go ahead, and I know there's a couple more chemicals, but would you say that dopamine and testosterone are like the two big chemicals that are released, or is it even categorized that way?
I would say so. If we're gonna, put these in a tier list, it'd be dopamine at the top, and then under that would be the four other chemicals that are linked to it.
So, and I don't want you to. I don't want to sound like we're just surveying this and moving on. But what's significant? If you could just give a brief summation, what's significant about the other ones? There's dopamine, there's testosterone, there's like three more. What are they, and what's significant about them?
The other three are norepinephrine, which that's our adrenaline, right? That's what we typically call adrenaline, is norepinephrine. The other one is oxytocin and serotonin. Norepinephrine, or adrenaline, the reason why that's dangerous, it gets released when we have sexual encounters or when we watch pornography. But they found that when you experience something with adrenaline coursing through your veins, or norepinephrine, you remember that event more clearly. And so these images, that's why when you talk to porn addicts or anyone that's really watched pornography, they can remember things that have happened 10 and 15 years ago. They can remember these scenes or these pictures. They are seared onto their brain because they experienced that with norepinephrine coursing through their veins. Oxytocin, interestingly enough, our brains naturally produce it, but that's the drug that meth is trying to get a higher release in our brains. So meth addicts, I don't know if you knew this, they're not addicted to meth. They're addicted to the oxytocin that could...
Sorry, Chris, say that again. Say that again. They're what now?
The meth addicts?
Is that
what you're talking about? Meth addicts, the meth that is a drug that causes a release of oxytocin in our brains.
So you're saying that the meth addict isn't addicted to the meth; they're addicted to the release of the oxytocin.
Yeah. They're addicted to the feeling, to the high.
Gotcha.
Right? And oxytocin is sometimes called the cuddle drug. It's the love drug. Mm-hmm. It's this feeling of human connection that you get. It's also released during sex. You get this feeling of connectedness, and in a marriage relationship, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You want that connectedness with your spouse, and a sexual relationship is the deepest, most intimate relationship a person can have, and that's part of the reason why. But when that gets released, when you're watching pornography, the addict starts feeling connected to these actors or actresses. They start feeling connected to these images, like they are falling in love with them. And as we know, love is very powerful. It's a very powerful thing. Yeah. It makes you do all sorts of strange and crazy stuff. And when you connect that with pornography, you're in for a world of hurt, because the image or the scene or the actress or actor can never fulfill their part of the human relationship. So that's a problem. And then serotonin it's a feeling of calmness or an elevated mood. And that alone isn't bad by itself, but when you start chasing that, when you start saying to yourself, okay, I don't feel normal unless I have these elevated levels of serotonin, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get that, it becomes a problem.
So are all of these released at the same time?
Yeah. So
goodness.
This is a cocktail of drugs that our brains naturally produce, that when you watch pornography and act out to it, they all get released at the same time. And so that is really the addicting part of pornography addiction. It's not so much about sex.
Yeah,
it's not about the scenes. It's the feeling that you get.
Like, just in my mind, just what you've described about dopamine, I mean, is shocking enough to say, okay, why in the world would someone now, that would have access to that knowledge, going back to something that you said at the beginning, why would they prescribe that to a couple? And that's just something that I run through. Now that you added the other components to it, it's like you said, it's a cocktail of drugs that are released all at the same time. So you said something about remembering images, scenes, actors, actresses. So are you saying that if someone is addicted long enough to pornography, that the brain can chart like a pathway to that scene, even if it wasn't there before?
Yeah. For porn addicts, from the ones that I've talked to and my experience personally, it is extremely, extremely hard to forget images or scenes or even names that years later I can still remember. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Like, I forget about a lot of things. I have a terrible memory normally, and if you'd ask just an average person, you know, I can't. How can you actively forget something? You can't. And especially when it comes to pornography, right? Our brains don't work that way normally, and why would we think it to work any other way when it comes to pornography? Especially like we were talking about, when we have those drugs that are in our brain that our brain naturally produces, helping us to remember these things. It makes it extremely, extremely difficult to forget these things that you've seen, these names that you've memorized. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to actually forget.
Wow, man, that's a lot of amazing but disturbing information just
Yeah.
about how the brain operates in relation to pornography. So, my next question is this. This is just kind of a secular issue, right? This isn't necessarily a big issue in the church. So, when we talk about pornography, we're not talking overwhelmingly about a systemic problem in the church, are we?
That's where you'd be wrong, Dean.
Really? Okay. So elaborate on that a little bit. What do
So,
you?
let me throw some numbers at you. The recent study, this was taken back in 2015, so still pretty recent. I'm not sure when they're going to release another one of these studies, but they found that 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women, they watch porn at least once a month. Okay, once a month, and you look at that and be like, oh, is that really that big of a problem? It's just once a month. Go ask your wife or your husband if that's a problem. Okay, that's just once a month, honey. Is that really that big of a deal? I'm pretty sure they would flip out, right? Because they recognize what that is, and we should too, right? Of like, once a month, if you know that it's wrong and you know the dangers of it, and you still can't stop and say no, that's a problem, right? If you continually come back to this at least once a month, that's a problem.
So,
Along with,
sorry, I was just going to ask. What are the stats among ministers?
it's about 50%. The stat that I have talks about, it's not so much how many preachers or ministers access pornography, but the same study said that 51% of ministers said that pornography was a serious temptation.
Wow.
And Dean, I'll tell you this: one of the groups that I meet with once a week is only preachers. It's a group of only preachers, because I think it has something to do with the isolated nature of our profession, that we are typically by ourselves, both physically and mentally, right? Like, unless you're in a congregation that has multiple ministers, it's hard to find someone who can commiserate with you, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I know what it's like, because the average member, you don't know what it's like to be, the guy that's in charge of all of these things that the congregation expects you to be in charge of. And so that's a tremendous amount of stress, a tremendous amount of pressure, and both of those things kind of lead preachers down this avenue of, like I said, if you can feel 10 to 11 times better just by the click of a button, that's a lot of temptation.
That's brutal. So that kind of leads me to my next question. Why do you think, your opinion, why do you think that this is such a taboo topic in the church? We see, obviously, just from what you've stated here in the 30 minutes that we've been talking, that there's some serious chemical issues that go on in the brain. There are obviously some serious struggles going on both in the world, which we would expect, right? Quote unquote, which we would expect. But then the shocking realization that it's a systemic problem in the church. Why is this topic so taboo in light of those two things?
One reason I think it has been our culture in the church for a long time to just not talk about sex, even positively about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Sex is just like, it's a topic that you're not supposed to talk about, and in doing that, it's done a lot of damage. I've talked to one couple that because the way that they were raised and their church never talked about sex, or the things that they did talk about sex were all negative. The wife in this couple thought sex was sinful, even within the marriage.
Oh, wow.
It was sinful. So you just think about that. Think about how much damage that can do to a relationship.
Yeah.
where this is the one relationship where you're supposed to be able to have sex and be positive about it. It's a good thing. It's a godly thing. God gave us sex. How much damage that can do. And then on the negative side, right, not talking about sex means that all the negative aspects of it that can happen also don't get talked about. So when anyone wants to talk about porn, it's kind of it's taboo, right? So you don't actually talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You use other terms to address it, like it, or that thing.
That thing, yeah.
And all that does is like, it only hurts us if we can't actually address this problem that we have. It becomes
like Voldemort. It's not supposed to be mentioned.
Yeah, he shall not be named.
Yeah, that thing that shall not be named, that God ordained, but we have a tendency to view as negative, right?
Yeah. And as like any sin, but especially this sin,
yeah,
it only spreads and festers in the dark.
Gotcha.
And so if we're the ones actively covering it up, then we're providing a perfect environment for this sin to spread. And
yeah,
in my mind, after knowing the numbers and how this whole thing works, I'm not surprised at all that these numbers are pretty conservative to me. 64% and 15% of women, that's conservative. I think those are vastly low.
So
compared to what it actually
what
is.
You're saying is, in not talking about sex in a positive light, or talking about it at all in the church, what we've actually done is cultivate the ground for pornography to be the vice that it is.
Yeah, because then what does someone do in the church if they start having a problem, right? Who do you talk to?
Well, you can't talk to anybody about it.
Exactly. You're not supposed to talk about it. So
yeah.
You can't talk to your preacher, you can't talk to your parents, you can't, husband and wife. When me and my wife were struggling with this, back, 15 or 12 years ago, there was no one. Like, who do we reach out to? Who can help us with this problem? There was nobody that we could talk to. And so we had to figure this whole thing out by ourselves. And
no, that would be the natural reaction. That'd be the natural reaction. If I can't talk about the God-ordained thing openly, why would I talk about the sin thing called pornography openly with somebody? So that's a good point. I think that's something, if you're listening, if you're a church leader, if you're an elder, if you're a deacon, if you're a parent, take note at what Chris has said specifically on this question about and I'm going to do the preacher thing and make up a word here, okay? The tabooness, right, of not openly talking about sex with your friends and your children, obviously, in a positive light. And so that kind of leads me to the next question. and it's just one out of curiosity. Some of these things that you've mentioned, Chris, in the time that we've spent together, I find completely shocking. Now, you've said, at least in the last little section, that those numbers you find to be conservative. What are the most shocking statistics in your mind that you've found about pornography, both in the secular world and in the church?
There's a few. Today, 1 in 5, and I think it's creeping up to 1 in 4 cell phone searches are for pornography today. So you think about all the cell phone searches, all the Google searches that people
Wow.
are doing, millions upon millions a day. A quarter of those are for porn. And you think about who's the majority of people that have cell phones that can Google search today?
It's
young
not the
people.
baby boomers.
No, it's young people,
Yep.
right? It's people our age, and college students and high school students and even grade school students right nowadays have cell phone searches
That's
that are
true.
unmonitored. 1 in 5, and it's creeping up to 1 in 4. 25% of all cell phone searches are for porn. What's another one here? 71%, talking about kids, 71% of teens hide what they do online from their parents. So that's good, bad, or indifferent. They don't want, the vast majority of teens don't want their parents knowing what they're looking at, what they're searching for online. And I mean, like, if there's no accountability and you have access to anything that you ever want, for a young person, 12 and 13 years old, man, that's a lot of temptation to do a lot of harm.
I saw something the other day. I think it was from the Daily Wire. Matt Walsh did an article where the top search engines, or the top number of websites, or the number of websites that got the most hits. It was like the 5 main ones is like Yahoo, Google, whatever, and then the next highest 3 were all pornography websites, according to what this article said, and that just blew my face off. I was just like, what in the world is going on here? I guess, what is the stat on divorce cases that involve one party having an obsessive interest in porn?
It's over half. It's about like I said, this study says about 56%.
It's over half?
Over half. Over half of every divorce case now includes at least one of the parties having an obsessive interest in porn. So as we know, there's a lot of divorces happening today, and just think about that.
Yeah.
Over half of them are because of porn. You don't hear that every day, right?
You don't
get talked about.
You don't. It's not even referenced. I mean, good night, man. Like, real quick, I know this isn't the end of the show, but we're winding down. If you, after listening to this podcast, don't go and look at the stuff that Chris and the guys and the team at Overcome have, if you don't look at that, there's something seriously wrong. I know that I can get a little preachy every now and then, but I'm going to preach to the audience. You've got to look at this stuff. We have to equip churches with this stuff. We have to, produce people who are going to be leaders in this area in the church. It just seems so vital, and I've been an advocate for a lot of the things that Chris has talked about, in my own personal ministry and talking to friends, but this is just a whole new scope for me. I'm one that likes to flap my gums, but there have been times, even in this show, Chris, where you have said something to me, and I just don't know how to respond, just because of the shock of what you've said. So, my last question is an obvious question, but it might be a very difficult question. So, how does someone we've talked a lot of about how this impacts the culture, this impacts the church, this impacts marriages, teens. How does someone who's entrenched in this addiction get out of it? And I know that's another loaded question that we could do a whole nother episode on. But how does that even take place?
It's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of work to dig yourself out of this hole that you've created for yourself It takes a lot of work and a lot of willingness to actually do the work. But I will say this, there is hope. And so if you're listening to this or watching this or whatever, and you feel like you've tried everything, you feel like there's no hope for you, reach out. Go to I'm sure Dean, you're going to give them contact information as far as the website.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you
like
to
that.
provide that at the end of the show. You're going to get the last shameless plug.
Well, reach out, because the thing is pornography addiction, it's classified as an intimacy disorder. It's an intimacy disorder. And what I mean by that is that the problem isn't so much that there's this thing out there, right? We can't available, going to be made available. The problem isn't in that. The problem is that we have developed, and in some part the churches are culpable for this, of creating an environment where we are afraid to be who we are. We don't want people to see who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you live in an environment like that, then the way that you cope by putting on this face and being fake all the time, the way that the porn addict copes is by acting out to pornography. And so the way you change that is you have to practice real intimacy some way. The way that we found most helpful is by doing a style of group therapy or a support group type thing, where men, we are asked a series of questions every week. You show up to group every week, and you're in an environment where you are allowed and encouraged to be who you are, to be yourself, as brutal and ugly as that might be. And really, the church should be the one place where we're allowed to do that. Amen. But it hasn't been. It hasn't been.
No, I'm so with you there.
That's the one way that we found to really work and recover from a pornography addiction.
And I'll follow up on that. I mean, I can't imagine how things would be different in the church if we did become what you're talking about, a place, a safe haven where people with this specific addiction were just allowed to say, this is the ugly truth, and this is who I am, and I want to be a different person. And then the church responded with, all right, let's treat this person the way that Jesus treated people that he encountered that had sexual sin going on in their life. I'll just say this, as we wrap up, I want to have you back again, because I think there's some other topics in relation to this that I want to dig into for the benefit of those people who are listening to the show that struggle with this issue, but also for people who say, you know what, I've kind of come through the fire on this issue, and I want to be a leader in this issue. I want to be a resource on this issue. And maybe it's not just, the guy. Maybe it's the gal, right? So I want to have you back for that, Chris. Standing invitation always for you to come back and talk more about this issue. So, as we close it out here the last couple of minutes, just go ahead and give people your information, where they can get some of the resources that you have, website information, email, any of that stuff that you want to put out there, podcast, whatever you've got going on, man. Take the last 2 minutes and just tell people where they can find your stuff.
Yeah. So again, the website is wheniamweak.org. And that comes from our theme verse, which is 2 Corinthians 12:10. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. That's what we believe in. That's what that's the intimacy part of it, right? Of being allowed to be weak and to show people who you really are. So wheniamweak.org. You can email me at chris@wheniamweak.org. We also have Facebook and Twitter. So this is a little different because people already had the name that I wanted. So it's when I'm weak. So it's at When I'm Weak or Facebook.com/When I'm Weak. So check those out. We have resources. We have articles. We're trying to come out with an article every week, but sometimes things get busy. And we have a podcast. It's called the Overcome Porncast. Really catchy title for us there that you can check out. My co-host and I, Jack Dodgen, we talk about all sorts of issues. And if you're looking for information, go check it out. There's a lot there, a lot that you find for husbands, wives, churches, church leaders, whatever it may be. There's something for you on the site.
Thanks again to Chris Krotz of Overcome. I greatly appreciate having you not only on the show, but as a soldier for the church, for the kingdom, and a guy that's on the front lines of this very important, devastating addiction that ravages not only people in the culture, but also people in the church. And I am completely and totally convinced, upon our conversation, that this is an area of apologetics for equipping families, for equipping churches, for equipping leaders on how to address not only the secular questions about the problems with pornography, but also the church questions about the problems with pornography. So thank you once again, Chris. Thank you guys for listening in. This is Dean Meadows signing off. And remember, equip yourself to engage culture. Have a great day, and God bless.